Anytime there was a hanging in a small town, it drew a crowd. And the small, very small city of Grayson, Kentucky was no exception. Thousands of people from far and near came to witness what happened. But the backstory behind the occurrence that occurred here in Grayson, Kentucky is just bone chilling. Sit back, buckle up. We are going for a crazy ride.
Forgotten by time, lives ended by the hand of someone else in cold blood. We finish their stories because they were not able to finish their own. You're watching Vintage Murder, a Whit Docs series. There is a fountain filled with blood drawn from Emmanuel's veins, and sinners plunged beneath that flood lose all their guilty stains. Those words were sung by the Reverend C.C. Thompson as James DeWitt was being led to the gallows to face his sentence. The Reverend Thompson was the spiritual advisor to James DeWitt. The end of the road, a road that had been fraught with heinous and senseless tragedy. It was all about to come to an end for James DeWitt. DeWitt had prepared a statement for the Reverend Thompson to read, one that would outline the facts of the crime, along with a confession of such events. A 25-year-old man, DeWitt would accept his fate. He would be able to carefully plan out certain things surrounding his death, including making a statement and seemingly making peace with his maker. These privileges that he would be afforded by a court of law and standard operating procedures are privileges that he would not afford to his victim. Elizabeth DeWitt, age 40, was the wife of James. James was on his way to the gallows, black hood being secured over his head. He was asked by the sheriff if he needed any assistance. With much indifference, he replied, "No, I can stand it all right." James had accepted his much-deserved fate, but just how did we end up here? With the Reverend Thompson, James DeWitt, the sheriff, and 5,000 onlookers awaiting the sentence to be carried out. Let's go back a little further in time. Elizabeth DeWitt was missing. No clue, no leads. Nobody knew. Seemingly vanished. Her estranged husband also seemed clueless as to her whereabouts, so the community of Everman's Creek, right outside of the city limits of Grayson, Kentucky, began their search. Grayson was a small town in northeast Kentucky, and there wasn't a lot of crime. Neighbors would do the normal neighborly things with a sense of hospitality, and in a small, tight-knit town like Grayson, there were few strangers, especially in 1895. Heinous crimes were simply not a part of life here. James and Elizabeth DeWitt were estranged in an unhappy marriage, and he would actually seek a divorce. The two would separate. Although estranged and separated, the thoughts of reconciliation would not be out of the question. So on November 14, 1895, when Elizabeth began missing, there were no immediate thoughts of him being involved in any way. And when the search began, James would help. He joined the search party looking for his estranged wife. Several different locations were checked and searched, places that she was known to be or places that she could have been. The search came up empty. There were no immediate signs of foul play. That all changed in a big way when someone happened to search an area that had already been searched by the party, and there the body of Elizabeth DeWitt would be found. It was obvious now. The lifeless body couldn't have made it there by itself. All eyes began pointing towards James. There was no evidence to make an arrest, but given the circumstances, no question, he was the prime suspect. He would be taken into custody for questioning. As such, whispers began tearing through the community about Elizabeth, and conclusions were already being drawn in the court of public opinion. And it was said when the body was found and James was informed of this, he began trembling. While in the custody of the sheriff of Carter County, those whispers throughout the community began escalating to the point of anger, which led to loud calls for violence. There were talks of a lynch mob being formed, and the sheriff knew that if he didn't get James out of Grayson, the mob would perform their own type of justice. Lynch mob justice wasn't a foreign concept in Carter County. You see, just a few years prior to this, in the same decade even, Lottie Yates was murdered. Her murderer was abducted by a lynch mob, taken to Willard, Kentucky by a hijacked train, and shoved off a bridge with a rope tied around his neck. It was a very real possibility and was certain to happen. James DeWitt was taken to neighboring Boyd County. It was believed that during this short but intense time, DeWitt was on the verge of confessing. He made one more attempt to free himself from the accusations by pinning the blame on a neighboring farmer. The farmer was a supposed fine person, and he was quickly exonerated. DeWitt was brought to Grayson to testify against the farmer. The alibi was provided, and DeWitt was taken back to Boyd County. He would tell the Boyd County sheriff and deputy, "Before you go home for the day, come back and see me. I want to talk." Whether it was from stress, guilt, turmoil, or whatever, James DeWitt wanted to talk. And indeed he did. A newspaper of the day described James as weak-minded and uneducated, even suggested that he seemed unaware of just how enormous this situation actually was. James, with the authorities hanging on his every word, began talking. "I tied the shawl around her neck to hide the fingerprints," he would say. "I then carried her to the corner of James Adkins and Billy Bryan's fence and laid her in the brush." He would go on to say, "The only way I can account for the bruises on her arms was that she was fighting me while I was choking her. I then carried her to Mrs. William Glass's fence. Then on the next Saturday morning, I moved her to where she was found." So how did all of this come to be? In an attempt to reconcile, James and Elizabeth had planned to meet on a nearby hillside to talk and try to work through all of the differences. Things escalated. James became enraged and began strangling Elizabeth. It was said that when James let go of the grip, Elizabeth was lifeless. A heartbreaking and brutal end to her life. James would go to trial. He kept a dismissive and even smug attitude throughout the trial, and it was finally time for the verdict to be revealed by the jury. We, the jury, find the defendant guilty as charged. James would receive the news of the guilty verdict with a smile. While smiling, he turned to the jury and thanked them for the verdict. He would say that he would absolutely not accept a life sentence and preferred a sentence to death. He would be sentenced to hang on May 21st, 1896. There is a fountain filled with blood drawn from Emmanuel's veins, and sinners plunged beneath that flood lose all their guilty stains. James DeWitt was on his way to the gallows, the Reverend Thompson beside of him, the sheriff close by. 5,000 onlookers came to witness the carrying out of the sentence. He was indifferent throughout the whole process, up to and including standing on the door that would fall out from under his feet. James DeWitt had went to bed about 9:30 the night before, right after he had consumed a hearty supper. It was said that he slept soundly, as sound as a man with a clear conscience. The Reverend Thompson read DeWitt's statement, which amounted to yet another confession, and what may have been his final words. A reporter asked DeWitt, "Are you satisfied with your future?" He replied, "Yes, I am all right, I guess. I have been converted and baptized." The trap door fell below his feet. James DeWitt would hang for 13 minutes, then be pronounced dead. We cannot find any records of the final resting place of Elizabeth other than she is buried somewhere near where we are today. It has been said that James DeWitt is buried in this cemetery where we are today in an unmarked grave. We honor and respect the memory of Elizabeth today and wanted to tell her story. Senseless and tragic, seems to be a tale told over and over. As I've said before, history is everywhere. It's up to us to find it. Please click subscribe to join me for more cemetery and history videos. Another life lost, another victim gone too soon, another vintage murder. Forgotten by time, lives ended by the hand of someone else in cold blood. We finish their stories because they were not able to finish their own. You're watching Vintage Murder, a Whit Docs series.